Well, a very happy COVID Christmas to you, from my bubble to yours. You know, I'm going to say something that I rarely ever say. I really felt convicted that the sermon I have for you this morning is extremely important. And I rarely say that, right? Like I heard somebody say one time, you know, when you come up to preach, sometimes you come up because you have something to say. Sometimes you come up because, well, you have to say something. But I really felt I had something important to say. And in fact, it kept me awake a couple of nights, including last night when I suddenly remembered I needed to say this before I begin. You need to understand a couple of things. First of all is that I'm going to be dealing in some stereotypes, okay? So this is not going to apply to everybody. This is not going to be a mirror that I'm going to hold up to everybody. Never let the likes of me ever make you feel guilty, all right? So I'm holding up some stereotypes, and this will not apply to most of you. It may apply to some of you, and so I'm going to leave that between you and the Lord. But conviction needs to come from Him, not from me. But these days, the stereotypes of Christianity are starting to speak a lot louder than what is real and true. And it's keeping people from coming to Christ as we share our faith. Now, having said that, you might be one of those people who think to yourself, well, why do I need to share my faith at all? It's a very personal thing with me, and it's a free country. You can believe whatever you wish, and I don't want to share my faith with anybody, and maybe that's you. Well, I hope that maybe something I might say today could possibly just kind of push you along into rethinking what it means to actually be a follower of Christ. As He said, to go into all the world, preach the gospel, the good news. And maybe before we're done this morning, you'll want to once again commit to being a light and letting your light shine. Let me begin with some very familiar words. I mean, these have comforted Christians and non-Christians for thousands of years, all right? Just the first three lines of Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Well, this is the year that many of us were looking forward to putting in the rearview mirror, right? 2020, the year we added words like pandemic and COVID-19 and social distancing. And just this past week, we're starting to learn the word variant in our vocabularies. But let me back up 4 years, because 2016 was also a year we wanted to say goodbye to. Do you remember? So many celebrity deaths that year, like one after the other. I'll just name a few. Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, right? Mom and daughter. David Bowie, Abe Vigoda. People my age will remember Fish. Nancy Reagan, George Martin, who produced all those Beatles songs, Prince, Muhammad Ali, Gene Wilder, Arnold Palmer, Leonard Cohen, Alan Thicke, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Florence Henderson from the Brady Bunch. Now this year, many of us just watched some of the final appearances of Alex Trebek on Jeopardy. But this year, 2020, it's not just the rich and famous this time. Here in Canada, we're getting close to 15,000 people who have died from coronavirus. In the United States, it's more than 330,000 people who wish their family and friends a happy new year at the end of 2019 and did not get to say Merry Christmas in 2020. And just this past week, they've now said that it's 1 in 1,000 Americans who have died from COVID-19. It's the number one cause of death this year in the United States of America. Now, I mention those numbers to some of my friends, and they'll shake their heads, and they'll say, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe that's not true. I see. The President of the United States, well, he still is for a couple more weeks, eh? He said, COVID, COVID, COVID. After November 4th, nobody will be talking about it. I see. Can I confess something to you? 2020 has become the year that I have never felt so stupid and unsure of myself in my entire life. So many of my Christian friends especially, now actually I'm going to rephrase that, so many of my Christian friends exclusively, because I've never heard any of my non-Christian friends so eager to brush all this off. But so many people look at me like I've got two heads, and they say, well, those numbers aren't true. Oh no, it's all a hoax. It's all just politics. Masks don't work. Doctors get paid more money if they say it's COVID. Yeah, you got to stop watching fake news, man. On Facebook, somebody accused me of spreading Marxist propaganda just because I happened to watch the CTV news channel. You can't make that up. But online especially, this year I started wondering, hey, am I the one missing something here? I mean, so many people I have a great respect for, so many I thought were a lot smarter than I am. They're almost speaking a different language. They're shocked with me. What? You say you listen to the news, but you never heard about George Soros? You don't know that Bill Gates is trying to control people's minds with vaccines? Microchipping, the government is going to control your brain. Some of you who can remember the 1970s, before we had social media, we had to rely on the National Enquirer or Globe magazine or any one of those tabloids that decorated the grocery store shelves. I remember the comedian George Carlin. He made a joke about it, right? He was showing front page stories about alien babies born to couple in Alabama. And he said, how did the big networks miss these stories? Now that got a big laugh in 1976, but not today. You want someone to immediately lose their smile and look at you like you just shot your grandmother? Just tell them you watch CNN or listen to CBC on the radio. In my whole life, I've never met so many people who all seem to belong to the same club, one that I wasn't invited to. But I'm starting to wake up. You know, I may not be as stupid as I was beginning to think I was. Now, I mentioned some of those new words and phrases that we've been learning this year. Let me add one to the list. It's called gaslighting. Just learned about that one this year. It's a word based on a British play called Gaslight. Written in the 1930s, made into a couple of movies in the 40s, the story centers around a systematic psychological manipulation of a victim by her husband. He's out to make his wife think that she's losing her mind. And the term gaslighting now refers to a form of psychological manipulation in which a person or group covertly sows seeds of doubt in a targeted individual or group, making them question their own memory, perception, or judgment, belittling a person's emotions and feelings with the goal of gradually undermining their confidence in their own ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, right from wrong, or reality from delusion. Any of that striking a chord with anybody? And why am I ruining your Christmas and New Year's by talking about it? Because I believe with all my heart that one of the biggest casualties of 2020, and this is not to diminish in any way the pain that you may have experienced in the loss of a loved one or friend. I know a couple of people who have had COVID-19 they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy. Some of them are still suffering lingering effects, months and months and months after they were declared free of the virus. But in 2020, and in the last 4 years, in fact, I believe one of the biggest casualties by far has been the testimony of Jesus Christ in North America. It's been flushed down the loo, and many of us in the church haven't even noticed it. We have been played. Now, lest you think this is some kind of anti-Trump or anti-conservative speech rather than a legitimate sermon, let me make it very clear to you, we have been played, and the player is not a human being at all. Who did Jesus mean ultimately when he spoke of the one who would come to steal and kill and destroy? Who's the ultimate robber, the thief, the liar, who's always been our accuser, the one who's doing a really fine job of dividing the people of God, making us second guess our own heads? You don't think we're being divided? You know as well as I do. There are people on social media that you've been avoiding. Bears that you are now afraid of poking. Or they're afraid of poking you. Friends and family and co-workers that you may have not have been able to even speak to around the holiday dinner table, and it had nothing to do with the lockdown. The father of lies, Satan, has been having a rip-roaring good time here in the last few years. One of the last things in the world that we as the people of God should be fighting over is our political affiliations. At the judgment seat of Christ, it's not even going to come up. Who did you vote for? Hope you were a good conservative. Why, look around you, will say St. Peter at the pearly gates. He'll point it out. Have you noticed? All the angels here only have one right wing. It's the big one. It's the one we like up here. Well done, faithful servant, and don't you worry. There are no liberals in heaven. Listen, it's a free country. Such a society like ours didn't even exist in Jesus' day. Believe and vote for whoever you want. But if you're a Christian, don't forget, all these things will be burned up when we stand before the Lord to give an account. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not conservative, it's not liberal, it's not left or right. There is a third way. It is called the NDP. No, of course it isn't. I just got to wake you up so you don't miss what's coming next. Oh, and by the way, no offense to anybody that voted orange this year. But way back when we were just starting to be called Christians, before we were really known as Christians, in the book of Acts, the early church was called the Way. We were called people of the Way. Now, don't confuse that. There is a group, I think in the U.S. somewhere, known as the Way International. They're classified by many as a cult. But in the book of Acts, in chapter 9, when Paul talks about his conversion story, how he's out to persecute the people of the way, in Acts chapter 19, in Acts chapter 24, you can see that the early followers of Jesus were called people of the way. And what is the way? Well, better question, of course, you know it. Who is the way, the truth, and the life? The one that no one can come to the Father through except through him. Jesus is the way. And I remind you of his words from John 14, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life, because I'm convinced that here in North America, we are starting to stray from the path that Jesus left us to walk. It was also John who told us in 1 John 2 and verse 6, this is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. Or as some Bible translations put it, we must walk even as he walked. Now, I really don't want to harp back to American politics. We've got lots of troubles here north of the 49th parallel. But it's affected so many of us here in Canada. A couple months back, there was a rally against mask wearing, right? It was billed as a MAGA rally. Make America great again. Except it was held in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Now, if you're still hoping that God's will be done and Donald Trump will still be president for another 4 years, we still have a few weeks to let that happen. Actually, a friend of mine challenged me on Facebook. She said they were sure. No, God is in control. It's been prophesied. Donald Trump's going to be president for 8 years. And I said, well, okay, of course, God is in control. What if the Lord only wanted him in the White House for 4 years? Ever think about that? Oh, or maybe back after a 4-year break. Will you be okay with that? And I made a public promise online, on my social media, that if Mr. Trump is successful in having all these election results overturned, I will post an apology online admitting I was suckered in by the fake news media. By the way, I've asked a couple of people on the other side if they'll do the same. Haven't heard back from them yet. The world, most of us here in this room, well, okay, we got a couple of younger people here in this room, but most of you people also watching, the world I grew up in, the world most of you grew up in, it's very different from what we knew as children. In the history of Canada, and for even a longer time in the U.S., Christians have never felt more like fish out of water. Our beliefs are being completely ignored. The world is just not one that we're comfortable in anymore. Now, of course, a political leader comes along, says they're pro-life. That's going to be a deal breaker as to where many of your loyalties are going to lie, right? People who believe in the sanctity of life, I understand that. But beyond that, I believe the typical evangelical Christian was getting pretty tired of being scoffed at, trampled underfoot, to use Jesus' terminology in the Sermon on the Mount. Going back 60 years, our views on prayer in the public school, abortion laws, or here in Canada, a lack of same, from same-sex marriage to Sunday shopping, in the modern era, there has not been a major political battle that we haven't lost. And tragically, Canada is about to change their assisted dying laws, leaving it wide open to all kinds of abuse. I mean, we're just too small. Our voice is too weak. But in 2015, riding down the escalator, along comes a successful billionaire businessman and TV star, not your typical politician. That's why we like him. And he is paying attention to us once again. Once again, we have a champion in the highest office in the land. We can hold our heads up high, Ethel. But we forgot something. We already have a champion. One who died and rose again on our behalf. One who's not given us a spirit of fear. One who is with us. Whatever the society around us starts to look like, and as time goes on, and I think rather quickly, the world is going to look even less and less like home. We're not Canadians first. We're not Americans first. We're not conservatives first. Now, in the U.S., it's like a litmus test, right? If you're a real Christian, you're going to vote Republican. Here in Canada, all kinds of Christians are proud supporters of the NDP, the Green Party. Yes, some followers of Jesus even voted for Mr. Trudeau. But none of that should ever come first. Not anymore. We are Jesus's people first. Followers of the way. Christians whose true citizenship is in heaven. You may even want to breathe a little amen under that. I don't know. Amen. Hey, amen. But I do need to ask, are we looking like followers of the way today in 2020 and very soon, 2021? Are we together on this? Because a house divided against itself will not stand. And we've allowed ourselves to be divided for far too long. All right, quick example, then I have a New Year's resolution for you. And my wife and daughter will tell you, Dad sometimes spends too much time on Facebook. I'm trying to be better with that. I no longer get into big public debates with my fellow believers about things that I obviously don't know enough about. And besides, their minds are totally made up. So is mine, I guess, in some ways. Debates, by the way, that are being closely watched. Not by the government, but by your non-Christian friends and neighbors. They are sick of us. You don't believe it? Just wait. Now, I have to say this first, right? Here at Roseville Church, and I really wish there were more people here so I could just look at you and say, here at Roseville Church, you've done an amazing job at rebuilding this church facility. Now, it's sad that COVID-19 came along when it did. Now, you know guys like Pastor Randy and Andy. Well, you know the YouTube name, The Randy and Andy Show, right? You know Randy and Andrew. They've got plans for how to use this place to make an even greater impact for the gospel, just as soon as we can legally get more people in here. But that won't happen unless you and I take the closing part of this sermon this morning very seriously. And I include myself because I never preach to anybody without preaching to myself first. So listen very carefully, please. People have seen our fights online. They've seen our blind posting of conspiracy theories. They see it's only their Christian friends that are whining about wearing a mask. Even your atheist friends are gladly putting up with these things. Why? Well, for the sake of others. They get it. This year, the pandemic has given a ready excuse as to why none of your non-believing friends will want to come here. Oh, sorry, it's COVID. Oh, we're in lockdown now. Oh, I wish I could be there, but you know. I heard about a product just recently down in the U.S. They sold out of this, by the way, but thankfully the proceeds were to a charity. It was a social distancing sweater. It was a Christmas sweater that had snowflakes and everything on it, but if you got within 2 meters of another person, suddenly all the lights went off and a siren went. Now, I've had an ugly Christmas sweater for several years. It does a pretty good job of social distancing too. But you just wait. When all this settles down a bit, and not for several months, so, keep wearing the masks, keep washing your hands, keep 6 meters apart. The life you save could be mine. Now, the exception might be something like an open house, okay? A lot of people saw the damage. They heard the tragic story. I've often talked to people and they say, hey, how are things going down there? Oh, that was a terrible thing that happened. They're going to want to come and see what you've done here. You'll have an extremely successful open house. But just wait for the very polite yet firm excuses that your next door neighbor or coworker is going to come up with when you can invite them out to some event at your church again sometime. Well, maybe it's next year's Christmas pageant, or especially if it's something you want them to send their children to. Oh, no thank you. Shucks, we're teaching our children to respect people who are different than we are. We've seen enough angry evangelicals, please and thank you. I've got some in my own family. But hey, you're entitled to believe whatever you want, so you enjoy that. But keep it to yourself. Now, as I said earlier, this does not apply to every follower of Jesus. Not you people right here, not most of you people out there. But it's the stereotype. It's becoming more and more real in people's minds. It's the one that's loudest. And that's what we all must fight against if we're ever going to have any impact for Jesus Christ. A week or so ago, I got outside and I actually got to see the Christmas star. Well, it was a couple nights before when the clouds kind of moved away. And so there was, Saturn and Jupiter coming really close together, right? Beautiful. And in the scientific community, right, you could search it all over online. They were saying, hey, it's the Christmas star. Almost like they believed it. I'll tell you the truth. They want to believe. They want to really believe that story is true. 2020 has left everyone you know looking for hope. Sadly, they're just not sure they can trust you and me anymore. They're not sure they're going to find hope in us. Think of it, you folks who are older. For the first time in 70 years, you mention a U.S. evangelist named Graham. People will look at you now. Oh, you like that guy? Woo. No, it's not warranted. Franklin is a far better Christian than I'll ever hope to be. But he's one of them, right? He's aligned himself with a political party. His father learned a hard lesson in the early 70s. Some of you might remember with his friendship of Richard Nixon. He had to apologize to the Jewish community for some of the things that he ended up saying and was caught on tape in the White House. He doesn't even remember saying it. That's just how we get yanked around. He's one of those crazy people. So are we in people's minds. Okay, I started mentioning Facebook back there, didn't I? It was back near the beginning of the pandemic. I decided I would try to post something a little positive on social media. Every Sunday, I take my guitar and my Bible, and I shoot a 5 or 10-minute video, right? A Sunday hymn is what I do, or another Christian song or a worship song, and then a few verses of Scripture. Now, I get some likes, I get some nice comments, even a few shares. I appreciate it. But when I check it out on the little app on my phone that tells me how many views I get, every Sunday I get over 400 views on those little videos that I produce. Every Sunday, 400. Now, some might watch it, a couple times. Some will maybe tap their toe to the song a little bit, and then it's like, oh, hold on, he's pulling out the Bible, time to scroll on. But I don't know, 300 people? 350? 400 people? They watch every week. Now, they don't want anybody to know they're watching, but it's the only reason why I do it. Nobody's tuning in because I'm a good singer, right? Let me share a couple of private messages I've received since I started doing this. I got a friend, I haven't seen him since high school. He's not at all a follower of Jesus, probably hasn't been in church since his confirmation as a kid. Oh, actually, we got the Plato Boys in here. He's in a band called the Jet Screams, and they're in Hamilton, they do surf music, instrumental surf music. Ask your dad about the Ventures, right? But it's fantastic, the music they do. It's really cool. Here's what he said one time. He said, "Hi, Pat. Hope you and your family are hanging in there during these days of COVID-19. I saw your recent post. Thought you made a very good point. I was, however, disappointed at some of the comments. I restrained myself and didn't say anything. LOL. I'm sure everybody means well, but sometimes people lose perspective. I saw one fellow, for example, who seemed to suggest that patriotism is part of their Christian beliefs. By contrast, I'm reminded that Jesus himself was a challenge to the leading Jewish establishment figures as well as to the Romans. Somehow, some people have gone from Christianity as a religion supporting the downtrodden to a religion that supports autocracy." Here's a guy in a group called the Jet Screams, and he had me looking up Google on what's autocracy. It means a system of government by one person with absolute power. Anyway, he said, my impression is you're fairly reasonable in your approach to current issues. I respect that. I read your posts. I even look at some of your music videos with interest. All the best to you and your family. Now this one is going to sting a little bit. As I was putting the words to this sermon together, it came to my mind, I really got to share this. But I wrestled with this one. A little over 40 years ago, when I first left home, I worked at a radio station with this guy. I will call him Bill. And Bill was raised in a very conservative Baptist home. But by the time I met him, he was, far from having anything to do with his roots, which intrigued me. Because about 7 months after I started at the radio station, I became a follower of Jesus Christ, a born-again Christian. Now, at the time, Bill could have skated rings around me with his knowledge of Bible verses. He memorized a bunch as a kid. We had some interesting discussions. But I could not understand how someone who had the good fortune of actually growing up in a Christian home, how could they ever walk away from that? I've since learned. But he sent me a private message one day, this past year. Now, we were both in our 20s, really the last time we saw each other. I haven't seen him in 40 years. We're both in our 60s. He is still not a follower of Jesus. Hey, Pat, he wrote, your recent posts had me ready to jump in, but I'll keep it private. I really don't understand how evangelicals are aligned with the political realm that is against everything they claim to be for. It was hammered into my brain as a child that Christians, well, they really meant the Baptist ones, that they were full of love. But later it became apparent they only love those who agree with their view of things. Over the years, they've displayed a hatred of gays. Well, they say they love them, but they don't unless they become straight. Drug addicts aren't to be helped because, well, they made their own choice to be an addict, so either clean up or you're on your own. The U.S. bunch are opposed to health care for all because everybody should be able to take care of themselves. And now, most recently, it's the right-wingers who declare COVID-19 and more generally vaccines to be some sort of a liberal hoax. Perhaps the most perplexing, he wrote, is the evangelical support of Trump. I just don't get it, never will. Anyway, thanks for letting me rant. Well, I told him I wouldn't mind if he actually wanted to make some of that public. We both knew his words weren't true of every follower of Christ. We both knew that. But he decided he didn't want to offend anybody, and in fact, he even apologized for leveling his rant at me. Now again, no false guilt here. No false guilt. He didn't describe everybody in that rant, but I did have to apologize to him. I said, Bill, you know, I first became a Christian right at the time that we met in Simcoe. I'm so sorry that so many good people such as yourself have been driven away by a total lack of love from those of us who have completely forgotten why he came in the first place. He appreciated what he called a kind and measured response, even if you were gritting your teeth a bit, he said, adding that I do choose my places to rant about such things. There are few people I can vent to, including my own family, with which I'm forced to bite my tongue. You are correct, he said. I definitely feel driven from the realm of the church. But I try to keep an open mind and realize the universe is wondrous and more complex than I'll ever understand. I don't know, could Bill be on a journey back? I don't know. Now listen, don't ever post on social media. Don't ever put a like or a happy face or a yuck on any of those posts where they say, atheists have a special day too, you know. It's called April Fools. No. Many of those people have been hurt. And in some cases, they've been driven away. We live in an unprecedented age when things like social media make more and more ordinary lives an open book to be viewed by the world. What are they seeing when they look at us? Well, it is only a few days away from the start of 2021, so how about I wrap this up with what you were expecting? A nice little message for the new year. Actually, I have a New Year's resolution for you. Now, it will mean finding a Bible, one with the words of Jesus in red, all right? The red letters of Jesus. And committing to reading those words in red. Now, you're going to have to read some of the black letters too, for context. But over, say, the next 4 months, will you consider to commit with me to spending some serious time reacquainting ourselves with the words of Jesus? Taking note of what he says, of course, but also look at how he lives, the way he treats people, especially those who are broken, those who are weary, those who have been left out of the mainstream religious life of the day. Listen to what he says about how you and I are to act, how we are to treat our neighbors, our friends, how we are to treat our enemies. The words in red from the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, start around Matthew 5, right, the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe one book for each of the next 4 months in the new year. And notice how the shortest gospel, Mark, ends up in the shortest month of February. How convenient. Just read a small portion at a time during your quiet moments. Don't hurry through this. Now, you might be saying to yourself, oh, gee, I barely get a chance to finish the daily bread before I run out the door and hope I don't spill my coffee on my lap. I get it. Well, then for the next few months, how about skipping the daily bread or Jesus Calling or whatever other devotional you use, just for a season? And as you read thoughtfully the words in red, as you observe this man who said them, ask yourself these kinds of questions. Do I look like this? Is this the way people see me? Am I becoming more like Jesus? Or have I settled to just look more and more like a typical 21st century North American evangelical who is so mad that it isn't 1950 anymore? And if I don't look like Jesus, what steps will I take to make it happen so that I do? Regardless of what our society is going to look like in the days before his return. And no, it's not going back to look like anything we've ever known before. That horse left the gate a long, long time ago. The world is marching forward, good or ill. Well, actually, good and ill. It's not all terrible. But it will never be a welcoming place for the true followers of Jesus, and it's high time that it wasn't. It was never supposed to be. We have lived with this false sense of entitlement far too long. It's getting way too serious out there to settle for the way we've always done things. And whatever things look like tomorrow morning and in the new year ahead, when your alarm goes off way too early and another day begins, whoever is elected and in power, whatever laws they pass, how will you and I still choose to live as disciples of the Son of God starting in 2021? In John 4:35, Jesus said to his followers, don't you have a saying? It's still 4 months until harvest. I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. There is a harvest coming. If I could sound like a bit of a prophet now, let me try. There is a harvest coming, right? I really believe God is about to do something major in the world post-COVID-19. Sadly, we are the ones not ready for it yet. But we can be. Let's make sure we are ready. Get your hands on the right plow, walking on the correct path. And may God do incredible things in your life in 2021. God bless you.